In today's manhwa, with the help of our main character, we can experience what it's like to go into the world of your favorite game. Moreover, our main character in today's manhwa will have to get a sweet and charming maid waifu as an ally. But the most important thing is the ability to increase your own strength and level up by killing powerful monsters. In addition to the many cool facts already listed, in addition to the maid, our main character will not be alone, because behind him there will be his faithful comrades, but not all at once. New adventures begin on November 2nd, 8:31. We find ourselves in some very snowy area. 17 days have already passed, and some group of travelers finally arrived in Moldova. After a couple of moments, a man in a glove opens his character window. His name is Jos Van Radcliffe, the characteristic is Commander. He is a man from the Howling race of level 28. After we see our main character, we watch as he closes his character window and is indignant at the terrible feeling after he descended from the legendary heights to a low level. The course of events is interrupted, and we are transported to a time when our main character had his own personal army and legendary rank. The ups and downs in life are always so unexpected. Next, we watch as a personal army under the leadership of our main character rushes towards a whole crowd of demons with spears in order to meet in a large-scale battle, army against army. It seems that the battle is taking place towards the army of our protagonist, and he himself, being in the front row of the offensive, chops down one demon after another with a smile on his face. Before his fall to the very bottom, our main character was able to single-handedly deal with crowds of high-level demons. He chopped them up as if they were some kind of noobs against him. But suddenly something strange happened, because our main character froze for a second in a state of shock, and something prevented him from continuing his cutting of the loser demons. He could not move. A couple of moments later, we watch as one of our protagonist's seemingly loyal army who was behind pierced him through with his sword, taking him by surprise. Having fallen to the ground after this most vile act on the part of an unknown person, the guy fell to the floor because the blow was critical. He did not understand who the hell could hit him. Because of this attack, during a game quest in which the guy's army took part, he passed out and woke up and realized that time had moved back as much as 24 years before the events of his death during the quest. Moving to the present time, we understand that now he is the Count of Northern Moldova, who is returning home to stop the seizure of power by his uncle. Even though his spirit has recently moved, the uprising must be suppressed. At this time, our online hero, sitting astride a horse, reads a note that the situation in the state is critical, and in the near future, he must increase his level and find the person who killed him. A couple of moments later, our main character, who was returning to the state in order to suppress the uprising, saw some strange figure with a cart. He wondered who it was. After this mysterious person approached Jozu, we saw an old man with long gray hair. When he saw the guy, he took off his cape and said that they had not seen each other for a very long time. Seeing this person, Jaws immediately realized who appeared in front of him right now, because in front of him was the manager of the house named Van. He remembered how he looked at their last meeting. After Jaws recognized the manager of the house, he immediately dismounted from his horse and asked Van what happened to him, and what happened to his hair and hands, and in general what happened. Approaching Van, our main character continues to demand this man to answer and explain everything to him. The guy does not understand why he is so excited. Apparently, the previous owner of the body was close to him. While Jaws continues to try to understand why he is so excited and understands that this is due to the feelings of the owner of the past body for this person, meanwhile, the manager is trying to tell him something. However, he immediately interrupts and informs the guy opposite him, calling him young master, that he cannot tell him much. Jose asks, puzzled, why this is. Our main character continues by saying that he single-handedly destroyed a detachment of orcs, and only thanks to him they managed to return home earlier than expected, but he stands in front of him and does not want to tell him. After hearing this, the manager of the house informs the guy that unfortunately he does not have the appropriate status. He must inherit his father's title and become the Count of Moldova. He continues saying that this contract cannot be destroyed because it is carved on the bones. Jaws shouts that he is the only successor to this title, and these lands belong to him. Jaws adds saying that besides, his uncle also seems to be considered the heir to the title after his father. So he returned here to finally resolve this issue once and for all. The house manager replies that status is not just a rank or title, it is a real thing, and he is forced to find the place where his father put it. But he must know this. Hearing this, the guy gets angry because he has been in this body for only half a month, and he does not know all the knowledge of the past owner, wondering why he should tell something without knowing about it, and presses the explore button. Immediately after the guy presses this button, a notification appears in front of him that says that the research is in progress. Below it is written about a crushing advantage in level and attributes. Moreover, another characteristic of this man in front of us is the perfect, full name Van Amos. He is a divine mechanism by race, and has a lot of abilities, and many of the attributes are basic. After our main character peers at the message in front of him, he realizes that this divine mechanism may be in front of him, a quest that he missed this year while passing through the sacrificial field. The quest due to which our main character missed another quest was very popular on the internet, but for some reason everyone who completed it was silent, and this quest suddenly moved to Moldova. Looking at the manager, our main character understands that this representative of the race of divine mechanisms can certainly be related to his family and the quest that he missed. Looking even more closely, the guy reads that the physical strength of the one with whom Van entered into a contract is dead, the state of life is coming to an end, 10 days remain, the rest of the data is unknown. After reading the full outcome of the research that our main character launched, he tells the manager of the house opposite him that his time is running out and he has only 10 days left before death. In response to this, Van Amos tells the guy that as he could see, he is not a person. Once upon a time, he was forced to enter into a contract with the Radcliffe family and son in order to serve them for as long as he was allotted. But now the eldest gentleman is dead. It is for this reason that he only has a short time to live because the contract is no longer valid. After that, he bowed and said that he was sorry that he could not protect him. According to him, he could not say anything more, and he would not be able to answer his guesses. He would be forced to remain silent until he became the head of his family and took on the title. After hearing from the dying house manager, our main character did not ask stupid, unnecessary questions. Instead, he listened carefully to this mysterious person and reported that he understood. Finally, the guy asked this man named Van where he was going to go because he only had 10 days left to live. Van Amos replied that the guy shouldn't worry about him. Having stroked the faithful horse on which he was riding, Van Amos answered our main character that instead of where he would go, he was more worried about the uninvited guests who settled at the guy's house. He finished by saying that he was now in no condition and unable to help the young master. Meanwhile, Jaws climbed onto his horse and convinced him that he should not worry either. Finally, before leaving, our main character told this Van Amos that all the garbage would be in its proper place, and he would throw out every last one of the uninvited guests from his house. A couple of moments after we heard the intention of our main character, we watch as some huge bells on some tower begin to beat loudly. Then the course of events returns to our main character, after he already comes back home and with his bare hands makes it clear who the boss is to the invaders in his house. Immediately after Jozu knocks out one of those who broke into his house, he grabs the sword that belonged to this guard on the fly. He is ready to continue teaching them a lesson. Looking at a whole crowd that is dressed in armor and armed with weapons, our main character points his blade at them and informs them that they really staged a worthy welcoming ceremony. This crowd of soldiers is simply shocked when they realize that right now young Mr. Jaws is standing against them. They believe that the guy just came to his death, because fighting for the title against the crowd is suicide. Judging by the crazy look of our protagonist and his blade, which is pointed straight at his enemies, he is ready to shed many liters of blood in order to regain his rightful title. After the crowd of soldiers realizes that the guy is not going to retreat, they rush from their place. One of them shouts and gives the order to the others so that they maintain their formation when attacking. Instead of running away or rushing into battle, our main character stands in place with a weapon at the ready when suddenly some strange thing begins to glow bright red in his chest. This thing continues to glow, and after a couple of moments it begins to emit huge streams of red energy, and the guy in turn absorbs this gigachad energy. Meanwhile, this crowd of soldiers has already shortened the distance to our main character, enough to use a spear to make a real shish kebab out of him. There is very little before the attack, but when there are literally a few moments left before our main character receives damage, he sharply opens his eyes and intends to make a crushing blow to this crowd. Immediately after this, we watch as the guy makes an incredibly sweeping blow that covers just a huge area and touches a huge part of the soldiers who were running towards him. But it doesn't end there. Our main character continues to deliver these powerful blows with his shockwave, which simply destroys these huge rows of enemies who are in panic. After our main character copes with an entire army, he turns to the remaining survivors saying that unfortunately, the weapon did not help them because it fell apart right during the battle. What a shame. After a couple of moments, our main character comes very close to one of the survivors and tells him that right now he will ask him questions, and he will obediently answer him. Immediately after this, the course of events is interrupted, and we are transported to the throne room of this city. This man is simply shocked when he hears that our main character is alive and is here. After this man hears that in addition to the fact that our main character is alive, he also broke through the main gate and carried out a real massacre in the very center of the city after his arrival. After a couple of moments, a certain dark silhouette appears behind this man. He says that it seems that Mr. Danlia has some difficulties. The man turns back in surprise. Turning back, this greedy dude in the throne room who decided to gain power turns around and hears that this silhouette is offering him to solve his problems if necessary. Immediately after this mysterious character emerges from the darkness. Before us is some kind of dark knight in an ominous cape who, if resolved, will personally solve this problem before the arrival of His Excellency. After this, the course of events is interrupted, and we are transported back to the street. We watch as one of the soldiers orders the others to immediately search every corner. They need to find the rebels. While these dummies of soldiers continue their search, Jaws talks about how his uncle is a simple merchant. He could not believe that he was able to hire a soldier and cavalry, and even several detachments. Continuing to watch from around the corner, the guy understands that these soldiers are professional military men, and they have approximately level 12. Ordinary people will not be able to reach this level. Someone is behind this. But Jaws is as serious as possible. He is going to deal with them. Continuing to observe these soldiers, he decides that he does not care about the number, and he will kill as many as came. Our main character also knew that the head of the detachment said that Danley was in the palace. In such a hurry, he moved to his father's house, as if he had already managed to get rid of our main character. A couple of moments later, moving to the square where our main character dealt with a crowd of enemies, where this mysterious dark knight in a robe realized that these boobies could not stop him. Next, this warrior in a dark robe approached one of the surviving soldiers. He stood right in front of him, and in the most serious tone asked him how one guy defeated them all. The survivor immediately answered this mysterious warrior that our main character managed to defeat them all with just one blow, which took off the heads of absolutely all the enemies. This was comparable only to artillery shelling. Moreover, this surviving soldier who encountered our main character added that traces on the ground were visible everywhere. The knight, looking around, realized that he was not being deceived, but he too could defeat such a group of soldiers. But despite his ability to also cope with a crowd of enemies, this knight admitted that he could not do it so cleanly, and Danley did not tell him that this guy was so strong. After this black swordsman, just like Guts from Berserker, found out all the information he wanted to hear, he turned around and walking away told the soldier to return to his post. Continuing to walk away, this clearly unusual character understood that, however, His Majesty would soon arrive, and the strength of a person of the silver level like our main character should not become a problem for him. But after a couple of moments, this mysterious dude turned around and realized that he couldn't let everything take its course. First, he needed to understand the situation that had already developed. At this strange moment, the course of events breaks off again and moves to another part of the city, in which we observe some guy who is carefully leaving the building and watching something. Approaching closer to this strange guy, we understand that he was looking out to watch the soldiers who were wandering throughout the city. He had long, collected hair, but after a couple of moments, something unexpected happens, because the observation of this suspicious guy is interrupted by someone suddenly grabbing him by the throat and using amazing force to move him. After a figure in a robe who does not want to be noticeable, grabs this strange eccentric by the throat and with all his strength nails him to the wall with incredible force. This guy was our main character. Taking off his hood a little, this guy calls this guy named Chris. He didn't think that he would meet him here. He notices that they haven't seen each other for a long time. Joes continues to hold this eccentric by the throat with a steel grip and asks him how his life turned out in general, but after hearing a parody of speech, he understands that in this position it is difficult for him to speak. Having given the opportunity to speak, this eccentric asks the guy what he is doing and calls him cousin. Because he could have said hello normally, Jaws did not kill him only because he is his relative. But here, by the look of the killer of our main character who looks at his cousin, he convinces this eccentric that his father will definitely not help him in this case. The weirdo, who continues to have difficulty speaking, says that nevertheless his communication was not bad at all. At least it did not look like he would kill him at the first meeting. Holding the knife with his other hand, Jaws tells his cousin that he doesn't care what kind of relationship they had before. They haven't exchanged a few words since his father planned to seize the title. Continuing to strangle this guy named Chris, the guy demands that he immediately tell him how many guards are in the yard and who is behind his father. He gives him 10 seconds to answer. Jaws, continuing to hold with his steel grip pumped with an expander, he warns him that if he mumbles during the 10 seconds given to him to answer, he will kill him on the spot. But as soon as our main character put in a little more effort, this eccentric immediately begins to answer the guy, saying that the palace is guarded by 24 soldiers, 15 of the lowest level, middle, and 3 of the highest. Having heard the answer, our main character immediately lets this eccentric go. The eccentric continues to say that in fact he is one of them, and in general he does not support this fight for the title. Jaws, having heard this, no longer wanted to fight for power. The eccentric, moving away from the guy, said that he should not joke like that because in general he fully supports him, and if his plan comes true, then he will be able to do whatever he wants with his father. The guy immediately offered to kill him. The guy gets angry after he hears that Joss is going to kill his father. He asks him to do without it. In fact, he betrayed his mother, and he is his only son. This is the only thing that binds him. This eccentric continues to say that not all people want power, but he has a bride in the south, an alchemical laboratory, and his own business, and he has nothing more to desire. While the guy continues to talk about the fact that here, you will not only have to resist the forces of darkness, but also go through snow-capped mountains in which it's a miracle not to freeze to death. Meanwhile, Jaws takes out a knife. A couple of moments after this, our main character accurately throws a dagger at this guy's head. At this time, he is trying to say that he does not know who is behind his father's affairs, but he can assume that. But the guy doesn't have time to finish his sentence when he is pierced by a blade thrown right through by our main character. He finally told Yosu that he didn't want to fight with him. But a couple of moments after the blade was thrown by our main character, we understand that the knife was not thrown at this guy with glasses, but at what was behind him. But this knife, apparently, is not capable of causing any harm to the creature into which our protagonist's knife was launched. We observe the ominous fog already familiar to us. After the knife that Jaws throws collides with something strange and the smoke begins to clear, we watch a leg in armored armor come out of this dark fog. As soon as the dark, unusual smoke clears and the frame rises a little higher, we see a dark knight already a little familiar to us, who came to eliminate the problem in the form of Jaws. A guy with long collected hair who thought that he was about to die, turned around and was surprised by the unexpected arrival of this knight. Turning back, he called him dumb. As soon as our main character heard this, he immediately wondered if we were talking about a special warrior who always kills from the shadows and is always silent, judging by his nickname or title. Jozu continues by saying that muteness and stealth are a good combination, plus he can silently wear the heaviest armor without giving himself away. This is definitely a first-class ability. A couple of moments after this speech, our main character raises and points the tip of his spear at this knight and tells him that he is probably wondering how his presence was discovered. The genius with 200 IQ in the person of our protagonist continues to say that of course no one else could notice this, but he saw that his silence was one huge sound barrier. This means that all the sounds on the left side disappeared the moment he approached them. Even a fool in his place would have realized that something was wrong here, and that's how his presence was discovered. Meanwhile, listening to the thoughts of the mute knight, we understand that in order to gain the superpower to interrupt song spells and hide sounds, he swore to remain silent all his life. In addition, the mute did not expect that Jaws would be able to notice him so easily. He cannot even direct a hidden sound wave at him. His will is too powerful, in which case his power is reduced. Continuing to do the analysis, the mute knight realized that at this moment he was not able to influence him with the help of his sound waves, so he had no choice but to retreat first. But after this mute knight decides to leave the battlefield, after he realizes that he is at a disadvantage, Jaws immediately notices this and realizes that the enemy wants to leave. That is why our main character, without wasting a second of time, makes a swift dash towards the Dark Knight in order to use a quick attack to inflict damage on him and interrupt his escape. But after the blade was about to reach the head of this mute knight, something unexpected happened, because for some reason the blade of our main character stopped as if there was a wall in front of his face. Immediately after our main character put all his efforts into his blow, the entire shockwave that was supposed to go to this dumb knight was reflected upward, destroying the tower. After Jaws made his blow, which was supposed to cause colossal damage to the enemy, the guy realized that something strange had happened, and everything did not go according to his plan. The rubble fell down. Instead of engaging in battle with our main character, this Dark Knight simply took out a scroll and began to use it. The guy immediately realized that this was a scroll of invisibility of the highest level. While the collapse of the tower into which our protagonist's blow landed continued, and debris fell on this strange knight, he slowly disappeared thanks to the effect of the invisibility scroll. Meanwhile, a guy with blonde hair ran up to the guy from behind, asking if he could defeat the mute. The guy at that moment regretted that he did not have an all-seeing eye. Turning to the eccentric, Joss replied that the dumb knight ran away so quickly that he could not catch up with him. He also recalled that the eccentric said that he had guesses about the one standing over his father. After all the activities finally ended, this guy with round glasses was finally able to continue highlighting his guess, which was that a certain Wilson family was behind his father. The guy continued his guess by saying that out of the 4 major counts in the north, only this family has a motive to act against Jose. This family makes high-rank weapons. While Jaws began to use some kind of thing, the eccentric continued to say that as the yard in Moldova becomes larger, they are under all-round pressure in the field of forging weapons, and this is a conflict of interest. After a couple of moments, this guy with round glasses stops talking because his spider sense tells him that something is somehow wrong again, and there is definitely someone behind him. Immediately after this guy decided to turn around sharply and pour the contents of the vessel into what was behind him. Our main character watched this with interest. As soon as this guy tried to indicate someone else's presence, the one who was actually standing behind him jumped away from them in order not to fall under the brunt of this strange attack. Despite the fact that this eccentric was not completely confident in his actions, our main character remained calm. He asked the one who appeared what was the matter, because someone was trying to pass unnoticed. Looking at the one standing behind them, we observed a girl with long white hair who slowly began to appear. Judging by her facial expression, she was very scared. The course of events is interrupted and we continue when this girl appears in some apartment and is under interrogation. Joss tells her that she hid well. Without the smell, he would not have discovered her. Joss continued saying that he could assume that she came without evil intentions, otherwise Chris would already be dead. He gave her one chance by asking why she was following them. In case of silence, death. In response to this, the girl asked our main character how he managed to smell her. She replied that she was just passing by, and she recognized our main character. In response to this ridiculous attempt at a lie from this girl, our main character appeared behind her and put one hand on the girl's shoulder and said that it was him. And now she would immediately tell him her name and origin. The guy continued his high-class interrogation. He took out his sheathed dagger and brought it to the girl's face. He added saying that he discovered her because of the smell from the sheath he had just bought. The girl really didn't want to say goodbye to her life. She answered Josu that her name was Nolan Allison, and she belonged to the Wilson family. She was very afraid and gave out all the information about herself. Chris, having heard this information, was very surprised when he realized that this girl was from the Wilson family. He decided that he should have guessed right away, just by seeing her hair color, silver curls, and eyes with a lifeless expression. When this girl realized that after she was revealed, and our main character standing behind her continued to look like he was ready to kill her, she raised her hand and said that she could not be killed without saying a word. The girl continued to tell our main character that she is like his cousin. She is not here to steal any property. On the contrary, she would like to find out if it is possible to foil the plan to seize the title. She continued saying that his action was a consequence of his elder brother's arbitrariness. But she also has personal interests. Half of her production is in Moldova, and the current confusion is disrupting her plans. The white-haired girl from the Wilson family continued saying that based on these facts, she is definitely on his side, but killing her brother will not affect her in any way. In addition, she asked the guy to remove his hand. Joe saw that the girl was really not lying and was afraid of being killed. He let go of his hand and removed it from his shoulder. He said that in this case the matter was urgent. The guy continued, leaving to the side, saying that he would kill his uncle with his own hands and thwart his brother's plans, and if she wanted to go with them she could go because he was going to act. The girl with white hair was surprised and asked the guy if he was really going to just show up at the palace for his title. Chris suggested at least coming up with some kind of plan. Having opened what must have been a family pocket watch, Joss replied that there was absolutely no time to come up with a plan, because anyway, everyone already knew perfectly well about his intentions. But initially there was more time. They could have spent this time drawing up a brilliant plan, but they spent it on that dumb knight who interrupted them. After listening to the plan that our main character will continue to operate, the girl answered him that she knows that he is strong, brave, and defeated 100 orcs on the battlefield, but doesn't he need some kind of weapon? The girl continued by saying that she has reliable information that her brother will be in Moldova today. In addition, he is a gold-level master, and all the guards in the palace are silver. While this waifu continued to persuade the guy that he was going to certain death, he simply opened his character window in which his silver rank was indicated. He was still 2 levels away from switching to gold. He understood that with his current level, it would be very difficult for him to regain his title by force, because there were even silver-level guards. But with a powerful weapon, he would have a chance to win. But after a couple of moments, something extremely sudden and extremely unexpected happened. The pocket watch that was in the guy's hands a couple of seconds ago fell to the ground with a loud sound. Immediately after this, our main character fell behind this watch. He suddenly felt bad. Chris immediately approached him along with the girl and asked the guy what was wrong with him. After a couple of moments, our main character, who fell to the ground, began to glow with some strange symbol that was visible even through the leather glove that he had on his hand. Then this mark continued to glow stronger and stronger. After a couple of moments, the light was enough to illuminate the entire room in blue. The guy did not understand what was happening. A couple of moments after the mark on our protagonist's hand started a real party in the room, he fell to the ground again, thereby causing concern to the other two people in the room. Despite the fact that this mark on Jaws' hand stopped glowing so much, it burned so powerfully with blue fire that it was able to burn through the guy's leather glove. Looking at his hand and at his family watch, he realized that the runes on his hand were exactly the same as on the Radcliffe family coat of arms. Noticing this strange similarity, he wondered what it meant. But Jozu was not going to stop because of this strange incident, which is why he immediately got up from the floor and headed towards the exit. He asked the two not to worry about him because everything was fine. Before leaving, our main character turned back. He was in a cold sweat. He told these two that they could only take care of themselves and wait for good news, especially Nolan, the story that interested him. The guy continued to tell this girl with long white hair that maybe in the future they might even collaborate. The two continued to watch as Joss left. At this point, the course of events ends and we continue. When the course of events moves to the cemetery, our main character comes to some grave and stops near it. Continuing to walk through some abandoned places, the guy could not help but notice that the pain on the back of his hand was getting stronger and stronger. It was unbearable. He was convinced that he had come to the right place. Looking around, he realized that this was the place to which his father had brought him as a child. The system detected energy. A coincidence was identified. The goal of Joseph Van Radcliffe was the first heir in the family. After the target was confirmed, the highest level of access was obtained by our main character, and the door in front of him was opened. Immediately after this, the guy continued to advance in the tomb. A couple of moments after the guy entered the deeper parts of the tomb, he saw various runes, one of which said that his family means origin from fire. Further, some strange processes continued to take place. The tomb into which Jaws entered began to be rebuilt. The next symbol meant that the heirs from his family were born of steel. The guy continued to watch as the tomb continuously continued to be rebuilt. Judging by his face, he did not see anything new. He was waiting for the moment when something would happen. But despite the fact that the guy remained calm before this strange incident, at that moment a huge stone seal with various parts took shape in front of him. After these symbols began to connect thanks to red lightning, the guy looked at all this and read these 4 runes about origin from fire, birth from steel, priceless wisdom, and eternal order. The guy continued to walk through these huge tombs. He remembered that these phrases appeared in the quest from the 3rd edition of the game, an ancient place of sacrifice that connects 10,000 worlds with each other. Continuing to walk and look around this tomb of his family, and illuminating everything around with the help of his seal, he tried to understand if the Radcliffe family had anything to do with this game. After all, thanks to the information made about other characters, he knows that divine mechanisms take place here. Processes somehow continued to occur in the tomb. Van's connection with our protagonist's family can be established by the runic mark that is located on their hands. The guy continued to move towards some kind of core chained in chains. The guy understood, moving further through this tomb, he understood that in addition to all this, there is also the status that is inherited in the Radcliffe clan. Apparently, this core was the title. But before this title, there was some strange dark blade that was stuck into the ground. Apparently, on the rune of our main character, there is a weapon depicted that is a divine mechanism. Meanwhile, the guy began to reach out with his hand, which had a mark on it for this sword, because the hand that would hold this sword is a symbol of previous generations of his family. While Jozu continued to grab this sword, and decided that he would pull out this sword right now just like King Arthur pulled out Excalibur, he realized that the combination of his mark and this sword is his status. But in order to pull out this dark sword that was stuck right next to the chained core, it was necessary to make incredible efforts just to pull this sword out of the ground. But despite all the efforts made by our protagonist, this sword of his family's inheritance did not yield to the efforts of our protagonist and continued to be in the ground. But as soon as the guy tried one more time, his efforts were finally enough for this dark sword to succumb to his efforts, because the sword was finally taken out of the ground. A couple of moments after this, we watched as our main character pulled out this sword and raised it above his head, and the red part of the sword lit up, and the system notified that the mark had been detected. But despite the fact that this sword of the heirs of the Radcliffe family seemed just a sword, it was not so. because after a couple of seconds it began to be covered in some strange purple energy. A couple of moments after the process of transforming the sword continued, the sword completely disappeared, and instead of it, some gentle female hand with the mark of his family appeared in the hand of our protagonist. The amazing events did not stop happening, because after a couple of moments this sword completely turned into a beautiful waifu with long white hair who was holding the guy's hand. It's no secret that anyone who found themselves in the place of our main character was very surprised, so he was surprised because right now, this damn sword turned into a waifu before his eyes. A few moments after this girl finally touched the ground, she stood up and looked at the guy with expressive green eyes. She called him master and said that she was glad to meet you. With her hand on her heart, this girl continued saying that in fulfillment of the ancient contract between her and the Radcliffe family, she heeds to her new master that her name is Yin Akrol, the Crusher of Swords. While the girl continued to introduce herself, the guy looked at her and realized that this magical object was coming out. It was not a person who turned into a weapon. It was a race that looked like a weapon, but could turn into a weapon. Meanwhile, the new maid of our protagonist, transformed from a sword, showed him her mark and said that from now on she will fight with her master, and together they will build a new world by destroying the old one. After Jaws heard his new maid's remark, he raised his hand and showed it to the waifu, saying that in this way their contract was concluded, and now they are bound by these chains. A couple of moments after this, these two touched hands and everything around began to glow. These two began to say that following the ancient agreement, their lives were in each other's hands. Continuing to hold each other's hands, they continued to pronounce an oath. They said that their courage would be the blade, and their union would be sealed by their own blood forever and ever. After the oath was pronounced and the two continued to stand, a huge flash of light illuminated everything around. This meant that the alliance between these two came into force. Next, Jaws stood in front of his maid and opened the window of her characteristics. Her name is Yin Akrol, excellent form, divine weapon race, level 23. She is a weapon that combines with the owner. Looking at the characteristics of this girl, the guy understood that her abilities are frankly good, since she is a magical object. With the passage of time, her skills will improve, and she herself will become stronger. Meanwhile, Jaws understood that it was not surprising that the old man appointed Van as his assistant, because he also has in his arsenal the ability to transform into a weapon, just like this girl. After this realization, our main character approached his new maid and introduced himself, saying that his name was Jaws Van Radcliffe, and from now on he would be her owner. Our main character continued by saying that he would tell her more about himself. They don't have time for this because now there is a battle with his enemies. He asked the maid what she thinks about this. Waifu, the divine weapon of our protagonist, answered him that she would be incredibly happy if she could help her master defeat his enemies, so she would follow him. From that moment on, after the guy got the weapon into his possession, the waifu said that it was time for the actors to take the stage, because it was finally time for the climax. At this point, the course of events is interrupted, and we move to the area where battles took place quite recently. It is to this place that the guy and his new maid move. We then watch as the two actors burst onto the stage with the most spectacular explosion possible by knocking down the door to what appears to be a battle-abandoned place. After these two got inside this building, Jaws clenched his fist tightly and looked somewhere like a predator. He menacingly announced to everyone around him that he had returned to fight for his title. However, in this area, everyone was already lying defeated. The guy moved on and told his maid that he had to wait a long time. But the time had come to show her all his skills. The girl was ready. As soon as our main character entered this place, after a couple of moments and steps taken, an arrow was fired at our main character, which was about to pierce his face. But our main character, as we have already understood, is not so easy to be taken by surprise because he managed to react and hit this arrow literally on the fly with his bare hands. Moreover, in addition to the caught arrow, our main character caught this arrow with 2 fingers. He immediately realized that these were silent arrows. He turned to the attacker so that he would not use cowardly techniques in his place. Continuing to walk further, the guy said that for a person who survived hundreds of battles and survived on Zango's field, struck by thousands of arrows, ordinary arrows look simply ridiculous and offensive. In response to this pretentious speech, the attacker replied to our main character that he can think as he wants. The attacker in the robe continued saying that there are rumors that our main character is simply an incredible person. But in reality, according to the killer, he is simply a hopeless idiot. Because instead of hiding from the archer's sight, he exposes himself and continues to move on as if nothing had happened. In response to another insulting remark from this killer, the guy replied that those mercenaries are complete scum, since someone like him could defeat them, because he is the same scum as they are. A moment later, this killer jumped out of his hiding place and showered our protagonist with a hail of arrows. He asked our protagonist why not try to defeat him since he is trash. But the hail of arrows fired at our main character was just another joke on our main character, because he again easily caught all the arrows with a wave of his hand. A couple of moments after Jaws of the Radcliffe family caught this huge hail of arrows, he bent it into a ball just like a snowball. But these were arrowheads. But this mercenary with blonde hair who was armed with a crossbow continued to attack our main character. Having taken an advantageous position, he was going to continue firing at the guy above him. Having landed down, this mercenary with a crossbow continued to fire at our main character, firing an incredible number of enchanted arrows at him to take him by surprise. Despite this huge swarm of arrows that was rapidly heading towards our main character, he continued as if nothing had happened to collect a snowball from the tips of the caught arrows. After a couple of moments not paying attention to the swarm of arrows that was heading towards our main character, he threw his snowball collected from arrows at this mercenary. He was amazed by this unexpected attack. But the life of this pitiful mercenary with a crossbow was saved because they managed to shield him in time. One of his comrades, who was with a shield, managed to take the blow in time with the help of his shield. After this loser realized that he was now safe thanks to his comrade with the shield, he immediately thanked him for his help, because if it weren't for him, he would now be left without a face. After a couple of moments, our main character looked like a real beast, because he had just dealt a fatal blow with a snowball of arrows. The mercenary warned the other by saying that this guy was far from silver level. The soldier, armed with a shield, hearing that the enemy in front of him was incredibly strong, was shocked, because according to the data they possess, this guy should still be at the silver level. But it didn't end there, because many other soldiers joined this building and began to surround our main character. The guy just looked around calmly. After the guy looked around and analyzed everyone who stood around them, and using his critical thinking, he realized that there was not a single enemy posing a danger around. The remaining two soldiers, who were dressed in strange armor, shouted to the guy that he was just crazy, because they outnumbered him, and he was seriously thinking of defeating them without weapons. A couple of moments later, another soldier, who was one of those who surrounded our main one, pointed his sword at him. He promised Jozu that if he surrendered to him right now, he would promise him a quick death. But judging by the face of our main character, he didn't care about the words of these idiots. On the contrary, he threw off his breastplate and became covered in the energy that enveloped him. He was going to shove their words back down their throats. A couple of moments after this, an attack began on our main character from all sides. They shot at him, arrows were sent, opponents rushed, but the guy continued to stand as if nothing had happened. In response to this, the guy only continued to move straight into the face of danger. He asked one of them how dare some insignificant nip threaten the great heir of the Radcliffe family. After that, our main character hit the ground with all his strength, thereby releasing a huge shockwave, thereby multiplying by 0 all the attacks that were directed at him. A couple of moments after our main character attacked this entire huge crowd of opponents, he released a huge blue wave of smoke that limited the view of all of them. After a few more moments passed, our main character with a demonic face appeared in front of this arrogant idiot with blonde hair and was ready to shred him. A couple of moments later, our main character grabbed this blonde idiot by the head with all his strength and asked him if he really thought that he couldn't handle him without a weapon. Immediately after the guy grabbed this blonde by the head, he decided with all his might to force his pretty face onto the floor. The blow was so strong that he once again launched a shockwave. After Joss Radcliffe fed this blonde with a choice layer of earth, he turned to all the other soldiers around him and asked them who else wanted to feast on blows. Our main character was not going to slow down. He took the sword wielded by the first defeated enemy and threw it at the very archer who first rained down a hail of arrows on him. Despite the fact that everything happened at a very high speed, the sword that our main hero threw hit straight into this farthest archer and caused him great damage. Meanwhile, the rest of the soldiers did not stand AFK and continued to try to attack our main character and win thanks to their numbers. But the guy easily fought them off even without weapons. After the guy simply instantly destroyed the soldier attacking him with a punch, he asked him if he only uses weapons to look beautiful. The attacks on our main character were not going to end, because immediately after that, 2 more soldiers flew at him, one of whom was armed with a spear and the other with a sword and shield. The spearman tried to carry out a powerful ranged attack with the help of his spear, but his attack failed. Because the guy easily caught his spear during the strike, the spearman was simply in shock. Instead of snatching the weapon from his opponent, our protagonist continued to hold it because he was going to strike with the help of the spear that he was holding in his hands right now. Immediately after this, our main character carried out his plan by sending the spearman with the help of his spear into the nearest column. But the second one managed to defend himself from this attack with the help of his shield. But after a couple of moments, this soldier, armed with a shield and sword, looked at our main character and realized that he had problems because this psycho would choose him next as a target. His prediction was incredibly accurate because a second later he received the same projectile made by our main character in his face. The soldier was in shock after realizing that a ball of arrowheads had been thrown at him. Our main character, who was without a weapon, continued to fall apart enemy after enemy. The number lying on the floor grew exponentially. Soon no one would be left standing. After our main character dealt with all the soldiers, he stood in the middle of the battlefield and folded his hands and told them all that if he wanted, his arms and legs would become deadly weapons. After a couple of moments, the guy remembered that all this time he had a divine weapon. He turned to her and apologized because he had completely forgotten about her, and in this battle he did not need a weapon. While the guy continued to tell his divine weapon that he would definitely use it in the next battle, another whole pack of people came to the battle site who were hardly friendly. Meanwhile, a window opened for our main character, in which he was informed about the amount of experience he received for dealing with the previous crowd. He noticed that these guys were given a lot of experience. While our main character continued to count the experience he received over the last year, another huge army of soldiers had already arrived, which almost filled the entire room. Surrounded by lying enemies and with his hands at his sides, our protagonist looked at the new crowd of enemies. He wondered if his level would rise to gold if he defeated everyone in the castle. Seeing the next crowd, the guy turned to his maid, first asking her to step aside a little, but later decided that the time had come. The girl asked if he said that he would use her later. In response to this, our protagonist turned to the girl and said that her divine weapon can only be used for an hour. They will no longer have a better opportunity to test it than now. After our main character finally decided that the time had come when he would use his divine weapon, he began to angrily look at the huge crowd of opponents standing opposite. Meanwhile, the commander of this crowd of soldiers who had recently arrived raised his sword and, pointing it at our main character, ordered to immediately attack and destroy him. Immediately after receiving the order from the commander, this crowd of soldiers began to move towards our main character. The guy, turning on the Giga Chad mode, slowly walked towards the crowds of opponents. The guy's thoughts before the fight were only about the fact that problems were arising one after another. And because of such high specificity of problems, he did not have time even for a short rest in peace. The guy came to the conclusion that he no longer wants to drown in problems, which is why he needs to finish. The notification that appeared in front of him notified that the divine power of the highest intention had been activated. Immediately after this, there was a huge explosion that demolished a large crowd of enemies. The epicenter of this explosion was our main character himself, who threw most of the soldiers away from him. Having caught fire with a bright flame, our main character calmly continued to move straight towards a collision with enemies. He just wanted to find out how strong he was now, and he didn't need anything more. Approaching the closest enemy, our main character hit him as hard as possible. Even the Iron Mike Tyson could envy his strength of blow, because the soldier whose guy hit him flew to the Maldives. But hell for the army of soldiers who attacked our main character was just beginning, because the guy grabbed the weapon that the soldier he hit had. He dealt a fatal blow to the crowd with this mace. The guy continued a series of beatings of these soldiers. He knocked out one after another. With each new blow, he said that his blows were still weak, and he had not achieved sufficient strength. While our main character continued to destroy crowds of soldiers with one blow to each, grabbing one of them by the face, he said that they were just a bunch of garbage who could not do anything. The guy's eyes glowed with a bright red flame. He shouted to the crowd of opponents that he had already killed hundreds of thousands of people like them, and this was already tiring him a little, so they should know about it. But suddenly the beating of enemies by our main character suddenly stopped, and he stopped from taking the life of one of the soldiers, because he was stopped by a strange blue glow from the side. Looking at the source of this blue glow, we saw another soldier who, holding his sword, began to cast some kind of spell, calling Jaws a monster. He said that his end had come. Immediately after one of these soldiers began to use this strange spell, others followed, and soon the soldiers were overwhelmed by even more mysterious energy. A couple of moments later, another notification appeared in front of our protagonist's face, which promised him that the duration of his divine power was coming to an end, and he had 5 seconds left. Seeing that soon he had a source of incredible strength that allowed him to scatter enemies like babies, the guy sighed because it was a complete disappointment that he was forced to become weaker. Meanwhile, the soldiers, on the contrary, gained strength and began a second attack on our main character. A whole coordinated heat was approaching him, which was ready to tear him to shreds. However, despite the fact that our main character will weaken in just a couple of seconds, all the attacks that were carried out on him were unsuccessful, because with the help of an ultra reflex like an Ultra Saiyan, he avoided the blows. A couple of moments after our main character escaped the blows of the spears, he jumped high, taking a position above the enemies. Everyone raised their heads and warned the others that the enemy was above. Meanwhile, the main character, who had reached a sufficient height, was heading down to perform a strike. There were only 4 seconds left until the end of his increased powers. He understood that he needed to hurry. Our main character gained as much strength as possible to put as much effort as possible into this blow of mass destruction. Meanwhile, there were only 3 seconds left before the end of the effect. After another second, everyone who was below shouted for the guy to be killed immediately. There were only 2 seconds left until the end of the actions of the divine intention of our main character. But the attempt of one of the spearmen to stop our main character was as unsuccessful as possible, because the guy put so much force into the blow that he simply passed by the enemy without leaving anything of him. There was only 1 second left before the effect of our protagonist's divine power ended, but in the meantime, he managed to complete his maximally enhanced strike by kicking the ground with all his might. After our main character did everything as he had planned, after he hit the ground, everything began to collapse from incredible destructive power. Meanwhile, the guy's maid stood in shock. After the smoke from the blow of our main character cleared, we saw him himself standing in the middle of these rubble and smiling broadly. Apparently, he was the only one who survived in this part of the castle. The guy understood that after his clearing, there were no enemies left in the estate, which means the time had come to protect the city. He killed at least half of all patrol and silver guards. Continuing to walk in order to destroy everything that moves and move what doesn't move, the guy realized that his bastard uncle had only a short time left to be in power because he was coming. Meanwhile, our main character's maid was very unhappy that she was not used. The guy told her that he had overdone it, but he did so that he could use her later at a more opportune moment. The girl continued saying that the furniture in the living room was made of red cedar, and all the artifacts and bas-reliefs on the walls were magical. The guy grinned and said that the Wilson family helped their uncle rob the estate. A couple of moments after this conversation, our main character opened his character window again. Looking at the level, he realized that before level 31, he needed another 2,400 experience points to reach the gold rank. But after a couple of moments, a huge pile of achievements and tasks appeared in front of the guy's face, which he completed. After seeing this, he realized that reaching level 31 would not be such a serious problem. The guy was shocked that he received so many achievements for one mansion. He would never have let the mercenaries leave if he knew that he could farm so much here. The girl behind asked the owner if they would go further into the city. The guy replied that the city mercenaries would hardly dare to stick their heads out after such a battle. First, they would go to the church square and ring the bells to notify ordinary, peaceful townspeople. He was going to notify all the residents of this city that Lord Joseph Radcliffe had returned to his rightful title. The girl replied that she was ready to carry out the order, and the two continued moving. But a couple of moments after the two continued moving forward to get to the church, we watched as someone appeared on top of them and was about to attack them. Our main character immediately stopped his maid with his hand, and looking somewhere ahead, said that someone had arrived ahead of time, which is why he would have to change his plan of action. Looking at this huge stormy thunderball that appeared right in front of them, our main character could not help but say that this is something quite very strong and is not a mediocrity soldier at all. After this stormball dissipated, we saw who was inside. Inside there was a man in armor and white hair. In front of us is a gold rank enemy. This is Brother Nolan, one of the Black Hands of the Wilson family. A couple of moments later, a notification appeared in front of our main character's face, asking him whether he would like to transfer his achievement points into experience points. There were 2 options, yes or no. After our main character, of course, agreed to this profitable translation of achievements into experience, his body began to be enveloped in flames again. The girl behind him watched with a sweet smile. However, the enemy who stood in front of our gold rank protagonist was not going to just stand there and wait for him to finish his business, which is why he rushed towards our protagonist. But a couple of moments after this enemy continued to fly at our main character, an explosion was heard again around Jazz, which threw all the bodies of the soldiers away from him. The gold rank enemy who saw this simply could not believe his eyes, because our main character had already used this technique just recently when he destroyed a whole crowd of opponents. After the explosion at the epicenter of which our main character was dissipated, he again came out of the smoke and, grabbing his opponent's fist, he asked him who gave him the right to life, that he was born such a weakling. This gold-rank soldier was not as stupid as the dummies that this guy was knocking down in droves, which is why he immediately jumped out of the guy's grip and retreated to a safe distance. The guy simply could not believe his eyes because, as far as he knows, the heir of the Radcliffe family cannot have strength above the silver rank. He must be much weaker than he is. Judging by what we now see on the screen, our main character finally decided to use his maid to transform her into his personal divine weapon for 1 hour. As soon as they held hands, the process of turning this girl into a weapon began, and chains emanated from their hands with which their blood alliance between the owner and the divine weapon was concluded between them. After these two joined hands, a bright flash was formed again that was capable of illuminating the entire city. Even citizens who were far from the scene of events saw it. After a couple of moments, this girl finally turned into a weapon. The guy told his opponent that he would be the first one he would kill on his way to rise to gold rank. Radcliffe ordered his opponent to immediately draw his weapon and accept his death. The enemy of our protagonist, taking a fighting stance, said that his name was Moser Wilson. In response to this, the guy shouted his name Jos Van Radcliffe and instantly closed the distance with his opponent and immediately struck with his new weapon, which his opponent barely blocked. But the onslaught of blows from our main character was very strong, so it was very difficult for this loser to fight him on equal terms. He immediately realized that something was wrong because the guy was much stronger than his rank. After our main character struck his first blow to his opponent, he had no choice but to jump back. Smoke rose from the blow. The white-haired man said that this was very good and Jaws was smart. A couple of moments after this, our main character ran out of the fog and approached this guy at incredibly high speed in order to deliver his second blow so that he could win as quickly as possible. After the guy closed the distance, he began spamming crushing blows. The white-haired man understood that there were no pauses in the guy's series of blows, but since he was a silver rank, it shouldn't have been difficult to fight off the attack. But the guy was sure that he had a gold rank, and defeating our main character should not be difficult for him. He would make him feel the difference in strength between them. This guy tried a clever attack to catch our main hero by surprise, but after trying to attack in the back, his blade stopped because the guy easily blocked this blow. However, even after the blow was blocked, the opponent was still behind. He said that it was very good. The heir of the Radcliffe family, his strength was truly able to hit him. A couple of moments after this speech, this man delivered a powerful blow to our protagonist's back, albeit to his sword, but it still made the guy fly into the sky. But after a few moments, our main character was still able to land normally on the ground without receiving any serious damage. He slowed down on the ground with the help of his sword. However, this gold rank opponent of our protagonist continues his attack. He shouted to our protagonist that despite his strength, this will be the game over. A couple of moments after this phrase, our main character actually received a large number of blows from the enemy, which made him feel like a basketball. After our main character's bounces from wall to wall finally ended, he slammed into one of the walls. Judging by his condition, he received enough damage to feel it. Meanwhile, his opponent was not at all going to slow down the pace of his attacks, because after a couple of moments, he found himself in front of our main character with an attack ready. He was ready to finish him off. But our main character managed to react at the last moment in order to once again use his ability to create an explosion. Thereby, at that moment, he was able to save his life with an explosion. After the enemy of our main character, who was about to finish the battle, was thrown back by the explosion, he fell to the ground and told the guy that his courage was truly worthy of praise. After a couple of moments, Jaws stood up from the ground, and despite his voluntarily sad state, he continued to stand on his feet. He was ready to continue the fight with rather serious injuries. At this moment, his opponent realized that when he threw his blow, our protagonist blocked his blow with his own hand. He had never fought with someone like him. In response to this, our main character replied that it was because he had never met a worthy opponent in his life. The guy was ready to continue the fight at full strength. After our main character shook the blood from his sword, he smiled and said that despite the fact that the white-haired man had a golden rank, he had not defeated enemies of his rank. How could he know the intricacies of battle? A couple of moments after the frame moves to the enemy of our main character, we understand that in contrast to the slight wound our main character received during the battle, this guy lost his arm. Thanks to the change in energy, the regeneration abilities of gold-level warriors reached new heights. As long as they were durable enough and nutrients were plentiful, they could regrow lost limbs in a few days. And if it's just a cut, a wound that doesn't go away, Then it only takes a few seconds for it to close a little and quickly restore a certain amount of fighting strength. A couple of moments later, after several conclusions of our main character, he rushed into battle again and dealt another blow to this white warrior of the gold rank who was left without an arm. This time, during this clash of swords, our main character was much stronger than his opponent, because after a few blows, he delivered a blow that was capable of breaking the enemy's sword, taking him by surprise. After this white-haired man realized that right now his weapon was broken, he was in a panic, because now he was left without a weapon, and our main character would 100% take advantage of it. But he still had some way out of this situation. The opponent of our main character shouted a spell of light power, thereby creating a shockwave that was able to throw our main character away. A couple of moments after this, after the smoke cleared, we saw the enemy of our main character, who already had huge golden wings. He used the form of the wind to launch another attack. Watching the enemy go through some kind of metamorphosis, our main character watches this with a smile on his face and said that from this moment something interesting could begin. A couple of moments after Jaws uttered this phrase, an attack of incredible speed was already flying at him, which could have deprived him of his head. All the characteristics of the white-haired man increased. The battle continued, and the enemy of our protagonist understood that his wind form endows his weapon with elemental properties, and with its help he can destroy most ordinary objects and weapons as well. But for some reason, when this guy dealt a whole bunch of blows to our main character's ball, there wasn't a single scratch left on his unusual two-handed sword, and he felt great. While our main character continued to defend himself from first-person attacks, a notification suddenly appeared in front of his face, asking him if he wanted to use a skill called Extreme Rage. It's not hard to guess that our main character, after seeing this notification, immediately answered yes. The reaction of our main character's opponent was not long in coming. He was very surprised. The surprise was quite justified, because after our main character used this skill, it seemed to his opponent that he had become a 3-meter Giga-Chad who was ready to kill him with one blow. Immediately after this, literally in one moment, this loser received a truly very powerful, sudden, and fast blow that forced him to change the local asphalt landscape. After our main character used this skill, the battle began to happen much more interesting because with the help of this, our main character evened his chances with the wind shape of his opponent. Looking through the eyes of this loser at our main character, we observed the frantic pace of this guy. The white-haired man could not believe that after so many battles in a row, he still had some trump cards up his sleeve. Receiving blow after blow, this guy with a gold rank simply could not believe that he could now lose to some unknown youth who suddenly came and began to ruin everyone. However, this guy suddenly had an inspiration. Stepping firmly with his foot, he realized that in no case were they going to throw away their skates in battle with a silver-level enemy. A couple of moments after this guy with white hair became much faster than his former self and summoned some kind of hidden blade just like an assassin. Our main character was surprised at this development of events. Next, we observed the course of events from the back of our main character. Apparently, his opponent managed to deal him a crushing blow. He is our main character still standing on his own 2 feet. A couple of moments after we got closer, we watched the surprised face of our main character's enemy, who couldn't believe his eyes at that moment. Immediately after this, taking advantage of the moment, our main character completely deprived his opponent of his hand. Falling down, this guy of gold rank could not believe that this was possible, and he lost. While our main character's opponent was falling down, our main character, looking at this, said that he was quite good, and his last counterattack before his death was really strong. But unfortunately, our protagonist managed to deal with his opponent. Before he could show all his power in the battle between Radcliffe and him, our protagonist's sword began to smoke. A moment later, our main character's sword transformed back into a waifu, who asked the guy if the battle was over. The guy replied that he would deal with any person who wanted to take his title. Looking at the defeated guy, our main character continued saying that self-confidence played a cruel joke on him. It did not allow him to assess the situation. What is the use of their myriad conspiracies now when everyone is dead? The girl, in response to this, answered her master that she did not understand all these palace intrigues, but he called her for only 2 minutes. Isn't that too fast? When the guy heard this, he was surprised that it was really fast. But despite this, the guy was extremely grateful to Yin, because if he had not had her divine weapons in the last battle, he would probably have lost. But he does not have equipment capable of blocking the element of wind. That is why the outcome of the battle with Moser was not completely predetermined. The girl replied that this was her calling. It was an honor for her to fight in the hands of the owner, and she would continue to do so. But the guy suggested that the girl hurry up, because they still have a church next in line, and the rage skill can suppress 80% of the pain. But when the validity period expires, his hand will remember that reckless block. Therefore, the guy realized that he needed to ask Lean to heal her as soon as possible. Meanwhile, moving to the church, we watch as two servants heal the hand of our main character with the help of healing. Next, the priest asks our main character what happened to him. He answers with a question. Could he explain why Saint Laurent looks as if there was no one left in the whole city except them? However, they ignored him and said that they had mended the broken bones and washed out the remaining wounds so that they could begin. The guy replied that he would not insist if they did not want to answer. But the guy noticed that their healing light had become much more powerful. He asked what this was connected with. Before us is an artifact that is capable of transforming different types of light magic into one. The priest replies that this is true. Equipment with divine runes is created from spiral crystals. It can, for example, change a damaging spell into a healing one called Heavenly Light. And in order to provide this artifact with the necessary power, the bishop led a team of most of the city guards, so there were only 7 people left in the entire church. He was lucky. The guy who treated our main character continued by saying that he is not blind or deaf, and he knows that he is a former ordinary warrior of the silver level. But you promoted to gold, he asked if he carried out the massacre. After our main hero's hand is finally healed, he realizes that it was really him, and his uncle and his loyal soldiers and followers are all dead at his hands. In response to the story of our main character, this priest only laughs loudly with his hands at his sides. Our main character is extremely puzzled by such a very ambiguous reaction to the news of the murder. The priest continues saying that he really didn't expect everything to happen so soon, because a couple of days ago this letter came to him. He handed the letter to our main character. The letter was addressed to our main character from Van's servant. It said that by the time he had the letter, he would probably have cleared the city of cockroaches. Meanwhile, while our main character is reading a message from his faithful servant Van, his divine weapon in the form of a waifu looks around and realizes that a lot has changed here, and she remembers the city differently. After a couple of moments, the girl's attention was attracted by something that made her stop and look at it in great surprise. From the shine of her large heads, it was clear that she was delighted. Next, we observe what our main character's maid was looking at in such surprise. The target of her admiring gaze was a huge statue of a hero from the Radcliffe family with his cool sword. The girl comes as close as possible to this huge statue and tries to stand on tiptoes in order to reach this statue, and more specifically, the sword that the hero is holding in his hands. A couple of moments after the girl stops trying to reach the statue, she realizes that she probably shouldn't touch her other people's things so blatantly. After some time, several dark silhouettes open the door and tell this girl, calling her by name, that they are leaving soon. The girl continues to drool over this statue. These two were the priest and our main character himself, who at that moment continued to button up his shirt. The priest asked our main character if this was his new maid. The priest continued saying that he of course knew that all the servants and maids in the Radcliffe family were young, including Van, but this person of our protagonist was too young in his opinion. Then the priest condemningly shouts at our main character, telling him that the exploitation of children is illegal. The guy replied that he can consider her his sister. Besides, she is no longer a child and does not do work. The priest continued saying that in this case they will start writing a speech on behalf of the king's heir. When the snowstorm subsides, they will gather people in the square and notify them of their formation. Until then, he can be in his chambers. Having heard all this, our main character replied that in this case he would leave all the troubles to him. He also added that he was extremely grateful for the hospitality provided by the church. A couple of moments after this, the course of events is covered up and we move outside to the priest who came out of the church and informed all its participants about what they should be doing now. Meanwhile, our main character did everything as the priest advised him. He apparently headed to his chambers for special guests and looked mysteriously out the window. After a couple of moments, the mysterious behavior of our main character is interrupted by the fact that his maid comes up to him and tells him, addressing him as the owner, that she brought him coffee. He thanked her. Meanwhile, our main character calmly sits down on a chair by the window, and taking coffee in his hands, he asks Ing what he thinks. He asks her if he has enough strength to conclude a contract with another weapon. Hearing this question, this girl is surprised and replies that it is difficult to answer, and as for magic, the owner's talent is very high. She would say that the owner's talents surpass all boundaries. After all, earlier it was difficult for some people to simply be near the divine weapon, let alone use it in battle. Fortunately, later they learned to conclude a contract and activate the weapon, albeit for a short time. And when the owner first touched her, he instantly made a contract with her and was able to successfully use her in battle. With the current level of power, they did not experience difficulty in summoning her in battle. Recalling the recent battle, she continued her speech by saying that many do not manage to hold out for so long. Most fizzle out within 10 minutes after using the divine weapon. And our main character, or the owner of this divine weapon, despite the fact that he fought for a couple of minutes, could have lasted a whole hour, or maybe more, even without any fatigue. After a couple of moments, the girl added that concluding a contract with 2 divine weapons at the same time might be an impossible task even for her all-powerful master. In addition, the girl added that no one in history has ever managed to possess 2 divine weapons at the same time, which is why there are many sealed old weapons in the armory. Looking at his reflection in the tea, the guy asked if it was possible to conclude a contract with 2 weapons at once. He added that given his abilities and the experience of his family, there should still be a possibility. After a couple of moments, the girl became very upset. She asked her owner what she had done wrong. Apparently, this girl decided that they wanted to replace her. Immediately after this, the guy put his hand on his maid's head. He told her that she shouldn't worry because she did a great job, so he asked her not to take it to heart. Our main character got up from his seat and came closer to her. He continued saying that he was not trying to replace her because he just wanted to know how far he could go, and she was enough for him for now. Next, the guy began to read some letter in which it was written that the young owner had probably already become the head of the city. It also said that when he reads this letter, he will no longer be in this world. Further, it was said that he would probably kill all the pests that had settled in the city. Artanis is a good friend and a righteous priest, and the one who wrote the letter trusts him to deliver this letter. The letter further says that our main character should not be sad about him, because now he must fulfill his last duty, deliver the body of Lord Dano to the family funeral. Continuing to read the letter from the former manager of the house, the guy read that no matter which of the 2 divine weapons prepared for him he chooses, he must understand what their life is like. Almost at the end, the letter said that the writer of the letter was going to tell the origin of the divine weapon and the essence of the Radcliffe family contract. The guy read it even more carefully because he can find out everything. Divine weapons do not belong to this world. More precisely, they were created by God, and they all came from other worlds, worlds that were destroyed by demons and monsters. To fully learn about history, you need to go back 347 years. At this point, the course of events stops and we are transported 484 years ago to a location called Starfall. We are watching a huge volcano that has already begun to erupt. Next, we watch some hero in shining armor who, with the help of his huge sword, continues to cut his way somewhere forward, killing all the monsters and demons on his way. But our main character is not fighting monsters alone. An Iron Man named Moa is fighting next to him. They fight for 4 days without a break. They wonder where all these monsters come from. The warrior, who continues to cut the monster left and right, answers his friend that he does not know. Perhaps the appearance of a huge number of monsters can be explained by the black dragon that recently appeared. This man in shining armor and with a sword is one of the Radcliffe family. Suddenly they are interrupted from killing monsters by some third person. She addresses them, interrupting them. They look thoughtfully. In front of us is a girl, Scarlet, who is a mage with flame magic, and a guy named Vlad. Apparently he is a warrior. Vlad points somewhere back and says that he thinks that they need to look there. After this squad looks where Vlad pointed, they see just a huge chasm that leads somewhere in an unknown direction. This squad, led by our main character, looks there. Scarlet, turning to the rest of her squad and spreading her arms, says that this huge crevice looks like a monster's lair. She suggests trying to somehow seal this lair. One of the Radcliffe family, standing with folded hands, says that they are here to defeat the black dragon Elba. Judging by his appearance, he is clearly dissatisfied with the offer of his squad members. The guy adds saying that he thinks that this rift is there for a reason. He wonders why don't they just go there and see for themselves. Vlad asks Radcliffe what he's doing. But as soon as the rest of the squad members ask Radcliffe what he is going to do, he disappears from the place where he had just stood. He thoughtlessly jumps into this crevice, the lair of monsters. Iron Man, a dwarf with a huge beard, also tries to follow Radcliffe. He adds that these monsters are special, which is why he wants to find out as much information as possible about them. But after a couple of moments, this dwarf under the pseudonym Iron Man begins to be pulled into this violet-colored crevice. His hand strangely stretches and begins to suck in stronger. While this gnome continues to be pulled into this portal, a huge monster jumps out from this lair of monsters and is going to deal with this gnome as quickly as possible. After a couple of moments, Radcliffe rushes to save this gnome, who instantly jumps on this monster in order to rip open his head with his sword and at the same time save the gnome. After this episode, this dwarf is completely sucked into the other end of the portal along with our main character. Radcliffe asks his team member if he decided to join him. Following the dwarf with the pseudonym Iron Man, the rest of the guy's team enters the portal. Radcliffe says that apparently they will have to do a lot of extra work. After these two find themselves at the other end of the portal, we see that in this lair there are a huge number of monsters and demonic creatures. When this squad is fully assembled, it is immediately clear that they are ready to tear apart the creatures inside. Radcliffe informs his friends that it is still not too late for them to retreat, but they decide to continue fighting. A couple of moments later, we watch a huge black Godzilla that is about to defeat this guy's squad, but he shouts to his squad members to rush into the attack. The course of events is interrupted, and we continue when the course of events continues, and we see how this Godzilla is already dead. And one of the members of the squad calls the others to him. Apparently, something happened. Moving to this detachment, we move to some location in which there are also many monsters. One of them does not understand why the monsters are so afraid of the steel they possess. After a couple of moments, this squad decides that they will continue to advance through this strange dungeon. Entering the next door, they see some strange, huge artifact. After a couple of moments, Radcliffe, without hesitation, walks inside with his squad members, approaching this mysterious artifact to place his hand on it. But after a few moments pass after Radcliffe places his hand on this monument, some incomprehensible black lightning begins to strike him, which covers his entire body. While this powerful projectile continues to strike our protagonist with black lightning, judging by his rather conscious gaze, we understand that right now he is seeing something in front of his eyes. And this is really so, because after a couple of moments we are transported to what Radcliffe is now seeing. He sees some spaceships that are now coming under fire from green shells. All this is observed by surprised ordinary space citizens who are surprised to watch the sky in which some battles are taking place between spaceships. Then various monsters land on peaceful land and begin to create real chaos among ordinary peaceful people. Real panic begins among the people. Everything around them explodes. Next, Radcliffe watches some strange scientists who enter some strange room where new members of the BTS group are being created right now. This is an amazing picture from the future. The next memory that does not exist in Radcliffe's head shows us a lot of people who are very happy after the victory of a crowd of monsters. They stand on the corpses of monsters and rejoice. However, everything is changing very quickly, and we are watching how this detachment of people who seemingly saved humanity suffers a pogrom. The monsters returned and tore many people to shreds. The course of events ends here and we continue. When Radcliffe returns to consciousness, he tells his team members that he just saw hundreds of thousands of origami demons swallow up the entire world. Iron Man Dwarf responds by saying that perhaps if they activate this stone pedestal with the inscription of divine weapons, then they will certainly have a means of fighting these creatures. Despite the rather logical theory of the gnome from The Witcher 3, Radcliffe tells him that he doubts that this thing can be activated with a simple switch. It is probably something complicated. The letter to our main character says that the next day, the legendary witch Kabbalah Chaos and 4 elite warriors Zango passed through the portal to another world. They removed the black stone from there and sealed the gap. This legendary Kabbalah Chaos witch joined forces with Moa Ironbody, and together they created the first divine weapon in male form, which was the first of the first. The witch named Kabbalah continued saying that she had cast a huge number of protective spells on the divine weapon so that the evil gods from other worlds could not detect it. She explained this conclusion and necessity by the fact that their instinct is truly terrifying. If any of them determine the location of their world in the universe, they will immediately launch a full-scale attack. Radcliffe interrupted the speech of this witch by saying that regarding the divine weapon, they should not advertise it. The fewer people in the world know about it, the calmer it will be in their world. Radcliffe continued saying that for the sake of long-term peace in their lands, they must always keep secret the existence of the divine machine and its weapon, which is truly powerful. The letter further stated that the divine tools at his disposal were created from a piece of the bone of his wrist, which they cut out from him at birth. The guy looked thoughtfully at his bone. The letter continued. It said that it does not have an original form. The will of their owner creates from them the type of weapon that is most convenient for him. For the last 10 years, his divine weapon has been slowly changing. Meanwhile, the guy cut out from his hand the very bone that was mentioned in the letter. Then it was written that no matter what form his weapon took, it was an ideal continuation of him as a warrior. Vlad and the Scarlet family moved north with the Radcliffe family, but 4 generations later, they forgot about their promise to keep the secret of the divine stone, as well as the threat of extraterrestrial gods. Of all the clans of the dwarves, Moa the Iron-Bodied is the only one who remembers the secret of creating the core of the divine weapon. And the Radcliffe family has since remained guarding the secret gates, closed with a seal. Next, we learn that the divine weapon of the father of our main character is a representative of the 6th generation of divine weapons. For more than 300 years, people have produced them into this world, suppressing their aura from the gaze of the gods. And until recently, the seal on the gate had not been breached, which is why his father, Count Bella, did not pay enough attention to it. It was entirely focused on the war with the demons from the Aragami. Half a month ago, a great volcano erupted, which was a sign of the appearance of a myriad of monsters. But this time, the power of the monsters that came was unimaginable. A dozen gods filled the gate. With these gods, there were a huge number of monsters that suddenly attacked the owner and surrounded him from all sides. Even if Van had been with him in his best form, this still would not have saved the Count from defeat. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Van's master, that is Joss's father, decided to break into the enemy's ranks and immediately throw out all his vital energy in the hope of destroying the entire group. And when his divine weapon, which writes this letter, arrived, he was close to death. In accordance with the contract, his life should have ended with the last beat of his heart, but the owner terminated the contract at the last moment. By this act, he allowed him to stay in this world a little longer and prepare a worthy funeral for him. And the responsibility of guarding the gates of time and space fell on the shoulders of our protagonist. At the moment, his duty is to write himself into the history books, but for this, he needs to perform the greatest feat, destroying the god of the void. Van continued in his letter by writing that he should under no circumstances tell anyone the information from this letter. He should burn it after reading it, because sooner or later the god of emptiness will find traces of his world. And when this terrible event happens, all life as they know it is under the greatest threat. The guy must put an end to the claims of these creatures on their land. This is where the story of the divine weapon of the father of our main character ends, because very soon he will be forced to fall asleep in his well-deserved eternal sleep. The guy finished reading the letter. After our main character read this letter from beginning to end, he threw this letter into the fireplace to burn it as the dead man asked for it. The guy understood that from that moment, he must become a keeper. The guy clenches his fist as hard as possible and tries to process all the information he received after reading the letter. He realizes that becoming a gatekeeper sounds pretty dull. At this point, the course of events is interrupted, and we continue our course of events when we are transported to the main square of the city. We watch the bell rapidly beat. Further on that square, our main character appears before his people. He greets all the inhabitants of the city. He declares himself their new ruler. He introduces himself by his full name, Joshua Van Radcliffe. Continuing his speech, the guy says that one of the residents already knows him, but today he wants to talk about something else. Probably they are not aware, but his father and his faithful servant died after the incident. And his scoundrel uncle took advantage of this situation and set out to seize power, the throne and his title of ruler, which legally belongs only to him by right and law. The guy continues saying that the few surviving knights of his uncle were noticed patrolling the roads outside the city, but he asked people not to worry. Soon there would be nothing left of them. Joshua Radcliffe continues by saying that since he cares, he continues by saying that he will take care of this personally so that the people of the people can be sure that he will kill these noobs. Continuing his appeal, he says that all his dear fellow citizens will soon be very free and will live as before, freely traveling around their native lands, and everyone who needs help can go to the cathedral. The guy continues telling his people that they should not try to deceive anyone, for the Lord will watch over them, and large families will be exempt from paying taxes from next year. After a couple of moments, the course of events ends and we continue when the course of events moves to a volcano called Grand Ice. Judging by the smoke, some kind of activity will soon begin. Then we continue when we are transported even closer, and more specifically to the foot of the volcano, and we are watching a dwarf blacksmith who is doing forging at this time. A couple of moments after this, the frame moves to the same dwarf king who at that moment in the present time became the king. He is contentedly watching all the processes in front of him. Right now, before his eyes, the birth of a new divine weapon is taking place. In the meantime, the king demands from the one next to him to bring his hammer. The dwarf asks him what is on his mind. The dwarf king tells his henchmen that now there is only one thing on his mind, and that is to fulfill the promise that he made to one family, and that was a long time ago, in ancient times. The palace king with the pseudonym continues to say that the word he once gave will always have to be fulfilled, because he is obliged to do so by his duty and the honor of the promise. Continuing the process of creating divine weapons, he says that divine equipment in the form of armor, framed by dwarven hands, is a gift to the guardian of the gates and an oath. At this point, the course of events stops and we continue, when the course of events moves to a dark forest castle, which is located in the mountains that have a high nebula. When the course of events moves inside this castle in the dark forest, we move into the throne room of this castle. All the knights and sorcerers who are inside. Some kind of ceremony takes place. A fully armored knight named Kylie says that there are 55 silver-level knights and 25 elite northern soldiers, all ready to march as per their orders. Von Lawrence continues by saying that 16 mages, including 9 priests and 6 silver-level mages, filled the magic coils to the limit of their explosive potential, enough to level the walls of any castle to the ground. In response to all this information, a man with blonde, collected hair hits the table and says that he doesn't care about all this training because they, in general, were of no use to anyone. In front of us is a man whose name is Zorgon. He asks, what the hell does it matter? How many people or explosives they have? It doesn't matter anymore. Because sitting here and pretending to be important military leaders, they won't achieve anything. Suddenly, a knight named Callie became very angry with this blonde idiot. He pointed his finger at him and asked what he himself had done, led people to reconnaissance in battle and was left with his nose, and now he's dressed up. The leader of the magicians also intervenes in the conversation and demands the knight to repeat this to his face, throwing the staff on the floor and telling him not to dare to look down on him. Complete chaos begins between these three. The knight on the right tries to rush at the stupid blonde, telling everyone else to clear the way, and he will show where the crayfish spend the winter to this puppy, putting him in his place. Then the leader of the magicians rushes to the ground, saying that Sir Bella trusted them with his lives, but at the most necessary moment they were not there. Because of them he died. Is this really all that the garrison is capable of? The knight also admits that they screwed up first with Sir Bella, and now with the capital. The blonde Christie is quite happy because no one guessed that the young master Joshua, their new lord, would be so strong at his age. The blonde, sitting back down in his seat, says that he does not understand that the young gentleman could first turn to the Order of the Black Raven and take the capital by storm together. But he decided to do it alone. The knight replied that he was able to independently deal with 36 silver knights and raze the mansion to the ground. He asked whether his idiot warriors were capable of such a thing. He continued saying that a knight who is unable to support the Lord in time, and one who does not appear at the most crucial moment, it is a shame to be with all of them, that one wants to go into an unequal battle with monsters in order to wash away the shame. In response to this, the blonde again gets up from his seat in order to continue the argument, but he changes his mind, saying that there is no point anyway because it's too late to talk about anything. That is why this ridiculous gathering of warriors decides to gather troops, because they will be needed in the capital in order to maintain order on the streets of the city, which has received a second life. The course of events is interrupted and we continue when we return to our main character. A lot of letters come to the owner of this state. He is terribly angry because he rules for only one day. The guy would never have guessed that with the destruction of the mansion, the servants who were responsible for these tedious paperwork would also disappear. He wondered where now he could find people to replace him. The guy continued telling his maid, telling her for the future that if she was given a letter, she should read it right away and not bring it to her right away, because if it is not very important, she can answer it herself. The guy argues that his maid has much better handwriting. The girl replies that she can't do that, and besides, the letter she brought right now looks important. That is why Joshua Radcliffe still takes the letter from the hands of his maid and tells her that he will still look at this seemingly important letter. He opens this letter to read it. Despite the fact that Morse code was most likely printed on this paper, our main character saw somewhere there an announcement about some kind of banquet. This guy is clearly a genius. It is quite obvious that after this, the course of events ends because our main character, apparently, simply cannot miss the invitation to the banquet, which is why we are transported to the venue. Our main character dresses up in a Gucci outfit and arrives on his Mustang on 4 legs. The banquet worker asks our main character to follow him because they were waiting for his arrival. Radcliffe at this moment looks like an elegant Sigma. He asks the banquet worker not to worry because he sees how he wants to tell him something. He asks him not to be so shy. While our main character dismounts from his pumped-up horse, the employee informs my lord that the chairman of the North Wind Trade Commonwealth would like to personally win with him before the banquet begins. Our main character thinks for a second but quickly comes to his senses, after which he hands the horse's team to this guy and tells him that in this case he will not keep the chairman waiting. A couple of moments after this, the chairman himself appears in front of us, who wanted to personally talk with our main character. He welcomes Joshua to his modest home. The banquet worker tells the guy that Alfonso Carlos is very grateful that he accepted his offer. The guy replied that he only agreed to appear at the banquet. He does not know about any offer. Walking further, the guy said that he is a military man, so you shouldn't play nice with him, instead it's better to get down to business. The chairman says that he's also not a fan of shaking the air. Meanwhile, we continue when we are transported further. We observe the most luxurious place where a banquet is already being held, under a wonderful cover of JoJo's opening on the violin. Our main character at this moment sits down to talk. He begins by saying that the road to the south was unintentionally blocked, and their regions lost access to the rest of the mainland. Moreover, he asks him to take advantage of the friendship between the Radcliffes and the dwarves to ensure their merchants' passage through the underground paths of the latter. Joshua asked the chairman if he understood everything correctly. The chairman replied that he was not asking to negotiate with him, but he was only asking to give them the opportunity to meet with representatives of the mountain people, to cross the mountains not through harsh passes, and to use the tunnels better as a dwarf. The guy understood that this chairman in front of him had a clear goal, but a letter came from Master Moa the Iron Body a couple of days ago. He knew his great-grandfather and is one of the worst in dwarf society. Meanwhile, Joshua continues by saying that his ancestors have been on good terms with the dwarves for many generations. From the position of the head, he can give him a letter of recommendation on behalf of the family. With him, they will at least listen to him, and not instantly throw him into the lava ditch near the city limits. The blonde man with a beard replies that this will be enough for him, and his generosity knows no bounds. While this chairman began to offer our main character to repay him this favor in the future, Joshua stood up from his seat and answered him that he had no need for money. As he left, he added that he, as the new head, would still need something from him. If he managed to persuade the dwarves to let them through the underground paths, he would ask him for an ulus. The chairman, standing up after our main character, said that on behalf of the Carlon family, he, Alfonso, vows to do everything possible to ensure that his request is satisfied to a high standard. Next, our main character turns to this chairman and tells him that he shouldn't rush things because now they have a banquet waiting for them, and they want to have fun. After a couple of moments, the two continue to head to the place where the banquet is being held. A girl in a red velvet dress beautifully plays the violin, while the chairman leads the guy into the main hall. These two continue to head to the main hall where the main activities of the banquet are held. Suddenly, something attracts the attention of our main character, as he suddenly decides to look to the side. Looking to the side, he sees a huge number of waifus for every taste and color. They look at our main character and get a little nervous. Two waifus behind begin to whisper among themselves. Looking around, our main character asks only one question: what is going on here? At this time, all the girls for some reason begin to feel awkward, but nevertheless continue to have fun. After a couple of moments, Joshua, with the help of his 200 IQ, finally realizes what confused him so much, because he understands that there are only women around, and he and the chairman are the only men. Our main character is a young and unmarried ruler of the city. Of course, all these young ladies came in the hope of catching his eye and climbing the social ladder in a not the most noble way. Moreover, our main character, who was a young ruler, was approached one after another by the mothers of young mothers and praised their daughters to him in the hope that someone would become his wife. At this time, our main character, who felt incredibly awkward, looked at the chairman who was smiling contentedly. The guy understood that this whole banquet he had organized was just a marketing ploy. At this time, another beautiful lady approaches our main character and worriedly asks her milord how he is feeling. She tries to say something, but the fired people are stopping her. Our main character is primarily a military man who killed hundreds of orcs and soldiers, so he does not know how to communicate with women like any other self-respecting Sigma, so he looks at her with the eyes of a killer. This poor girl cannot withstand the most severe gaze of our main character, which is why she faints. She is immediately caught by the maid who was nearby. She asks the mistress what happened to her. After a couple of moments, another waifu, who this time is a little bolder than the last one, takes advantage of the chance to approach our main character. She also respectfully begins a conversation with him. This girl has held out the longest so far. She extends her hand to our main character and introduces herself, calling her name Janine von Arca. She waits for our main character's answer. But the guy does not immediately react to the woman's hand that she extended to him. For some time, she continues to just stand and absurdly wait for Sir Joshua's answer. He smiles very suspiciously. But after a couple of moments, the guy still decides to show signs of life, which is why he reaches out with his left hand to his right, and with a deft movement of his hands removes his leather glove. In the eyes of this innocent girl, our main character becomes just a huge Giga Chad giant who frightens her very much. Extending his hand in response, he introduces himself as just Joshua. At this moment, this girl's courage is not enough to shake hands with our main character, which is why she also falls to the ground. But this time, unlike the last, she remains conscious. Finding herself below in front of our main character, she begins to be overcome by a cold sweat, because right now a real conqueror and killer of 1,000 warriors is standing above her. She tries to continue her speech, but the words do not fit. After a couple of attempts to say at least something, this girl decides to use the Joestar technique and makes a tactical escape away from our main character. Running away, she screams that she can't do this anymore. Apparently he screwed up. The intimidation characteristic of our main character is 18 points, and this is too much for ordinary people. Of all the women with whom he managed to communicate, only his maid reacted calmly to him. Remembering her, he continued to say that she is the only woman who calmly communicates with him, despite his passive skills, but everything falls into place when he realizes that she is not a person at all. Next, our main character decides to end this circus, so he approaches the chairman and asks him if he could return to his office. He answers positively, and they go up to the office. After a couple of moments, the course of events moves to the chairman's office. The guy asks him if he knows about the fall of Ares. In response to this, the chairman replies that he remembers something. The bearded blonde continues to say that in 832, the Ares fortress in the southeastern part of the Northern Empire was attacked by a creature. 58,000 people lived there, but everyone disappeared without a trace. Having heard and written down the chairman's answer, our main character thought in his thoughts that this was great, because the fact that the blonde knew about this meant that everything was exactly as he remembered. After all, in the last part of the game in which our main character found himself, Imperial Rangers discovered huge tunnels, more than tens of meters in diameter, covered with human remains and strange mucus. But despite their presence, these tunnels very quickly collapsed on their own, under their own weight, and they ultimately left no trace of their existence behind them. And then, when the seal was broken and black clouds of smoke filled the air from the ground to the mountains, a worm of indescribable size appeared right from under the city square, bringing with it myriads of demons. This creature spewed all-consuming acid from its toothy mouth, and its body was enveloped in magical vibrations that broke any magical connection in a huge radius. The monster instantly destroyed mountain fortifications. Then, returning to reality, we watched as Joshua, having finished writing his letter, handed it to the man and said that he had finished writing the letter of recommendation. He wanted to return to his request. The guy continued telling the man that, as he knows, every spring in the capital of the empire there is an auction in honor of the end of winter. The blonde asked the guy if he wanted him to buy something for him, but the items are rarely expensive. And he himself said that he had no problems with finances. One member of the gaming guild once said that special artifacts are needed to break the seals of summoning monsters and demons. Among these artifacts, the most famous are the silver key and the flickering crystal, and of course you shouldn't forget about a bunch of different magical volumes with different contents. And judging by the information from the players of the last part, the fall of Ares was not accidental. The blonde listened to about the silver key, the gem, and the book. He praised the detailed drawing he was able to sketch. At this time, the guy was thinking that the royal chronicles indicate that the magicians who explored the ruins of Ares found signs of summoning magic there. They talked about the remnants of chaos magic that was absorbed into the environment. And apparently, a certain circle of people tried to deliberately create a hole in the fabric of the universe. Who would have thought that such experiments could lead to the death of thousands of people and themselves? Next, the guy handed the sheet to the chairman. He was not sure that these artifacts still existed. If he got at least one of them, it would be good. So at the meeting, he simply asks to buy these items. The chairman, taking this piece of paper, answered the guy that he should not worry, and if at least one of these things was at auction, it would not slip past him and he would definitely buy it instantly. Our main character continued by saying that as soon as the chairman had the item he needed in his hands, he would need to send a letter to the Cathedral of St. Lawrence, and he replied to him with further instructions. After the chairman answered our main character that he understood everything, the guy suddenly got up from his desk and, approaching the window and folding his hands behind him, said that this world is very interesting. Alfonso did not understand what this slightly strange guy was talking about, but nevertheless he stood up and came up to join. The guy replied that with their hands they can change the fate of this world. At this rather strange and incomprehensible moment, the course of the event is interrupted, and we are transported to the maid of our main character and the name Yin. At this moment she examines her reflection in the ice. This girl, against the backdrop of a beautiful golden sunset, looked at the ice and, touching it with her finger, wondered what it was. So hard and cold to the touch, she continued to move her finger along the ice. She continued to study solid ice. She wondered if this strange thing people call ice, in her opinion, it was very similar to ordinary glass. This girl, finding herself in the human world for the first time, continued to explore everything around her just like an ordinary baby. Then her attention was focused on an ordinary icicle that was hanging on a snowdrift. After this girl was convinced that right now she had killed a cone-shaped piece of ice, for some reason it immediately attracted her attention and she wanted to study it as quickly as possible. That is why we then watched as this girl, approaching the trust, tried with all her might to reach the icicles that were hanging on the tree. Judging by her hand, which was shaking, she couldn't reach it. After a couple of moments, we understand that this girl, due to her height, could not reach this icicle. She continued her attempts to reach this piece of ice. The attempts continued. But a couple of moments after this girl continued her attempts to get this icicle, we saw how she finally achieved unprecedented success by grabbing a branch after unsuccessful attempts. But this branch, which our protagonist's maid grabbed hold of after the girl hung on it, treacherously broke at the most inopportune moment for her. That is why, immediately after this unreliable branch failed this waifu, she began to go into free fall with the final destination being icy ground or worse, snow. But thanks to luck, the girl still managed to land successfully on her feet, looking at the torn icicle. The girl understood that the records in her memory said that water at low temperatures becomes strong and hard. After this girl realized what this thing was, she immediately reached for her diary. She began to write down what this thing was. She was pleased with how interesting this world was. A couple of moments after this, Yin's spider sense worked just like Spider-Man. She told the unknown person that she knew that someone was watching her, so he didn't have to hide. Our protagonist's maid continued to tell this person that he was on the Radcliffe family's property, which meant that he should immediately appear revealing his identity. While this someone continued to follow, he still responded to this girl, calling her a baby. He told her not to worry, because his intentions at the moment were extremely good. A couple of moments later, we see this watching man almost in full height. He tells the girl that he is waiting for her master to return. He asked her if she knew when this would happen. This girl was not so naive as to immediately answer the question of a strange eccentric. She immediately asked who he was. And even if he was not an enemy, introducing himself is part of the rules of elementary etiquette. Meanwhile, the girl, looking at this guy, immediately completed the analysis and realized that despite the fact that this guy is very young, he has already reached the silver level. He answered that his name is Munster, and he is a friend of the Black Crows. After this girl heard the name of this eccentric and the fact that he was a friend of the Black Ravens, her face was, to put it mildly, not very friendly for this strange eccentric who suddenly appeared. Next, the girl answered this eccentric that my lord would be here soon, and since he was already waiting outside, she saw no point in inviting him into the house. The guy answered her that she could be more polite. But despite the slight harmfulness of this girl, this man still continued to patiently wait for our main character outside. Judging by his behavior, he really was not in a negative mood. This friend of the Black Crows did not think at all about how harmful our main character's subordinates were. On the contrary, all he had on his mind was that he managed to gather very loyal people around him. Some time passes and we continue. When our main character finally comes to the gate, he sees this man and realizes that he has a silver level, and his aura is somehow very familiar. Our main character, thanks to his amazing memory, even remembers that this eccentric's name is Munster. He says that they haven't seen each other for a long time, and Joshua has already managed to acquire his own city. This guy continued saying that he had been waiting for him all day. Joshua asked him if it was an option to simply accept the letter. Besides, how did he know that he wanted to meet? He hoped that he did not bring bad news. The guy replied that this was so, and this is not the best place to talk about it, he added by saying that his faithful maid did not even let him into the yard, and he was forced to stand outside and wait for him. After a couple of moments, Yin, or the maid of our main character, intervenes in the conversation by opening the gate. She asks her owner if she knows this eccentric. The guy replied that they are old comrades. After this girl heard that the two of them were comrades, her expression immediately changed. Then she asked this guy whom she sent away how he was feeling, and if everything was okay. These three then began to go to a more suitable place. The girl told our main character that she had mastered housework and began to learn to cook. Joshua called his maid smart. He continued telling his maid that besides the fact that she is smart and can grasp everything on the fly, the master walking behind could not stop admiring how wonderful a partner our main character had found for himself. After a couple of moments, the course of events is interrupted, and we are transported to that most suitable place, and our main character's maid is at that moment busy cooking. The master asks why he is her master. Next, we watch how our main character, sitting comfortably with his friend, peacefully drinking tea together, The guy replied that the girl calls him her master because she is his maid. Munster, in response to this, tells the guy that she is still just a child. He did not think that Joshua was one of these. The guy defended himself by saying that they were the same age, and everyone reproached him on this score. He continued the explanation by telling his old comrade that, moreover, in the core of this girl there is part of his bone from his right wrist. Roughly speaking, the difference in their ages is a couple of days. A couple of moments after this, our protagonist's old friend reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out some strange box. He told Joshua that it was a gift for him. The guy, looking at the gift, wondered why someone urgently sent him a messenger. He wondered if this had something to do with the fact that he had seized power. He looked questioningly at the gift in front of him. Next, our main character wondered and immediately went straight back to the point, telling this guy that he seemed to want to tell him some bad news that he brought. Joshua continued by saying that if the matter was not of paramount importance, they would simply send him a letter and not send a silver-ranked knight on their own to beat the thresholds of his castle in cold weather. The guy asked his comrades what happened. He was asked if he knew that only groups of no more than 10 people were allowed through the fortress in the Urals. The guy replied that he knew that Munster led to unrest in the center of the empire. In response to this, our main character shouted at Munster, telling him to stop beating around the bush. He is also a warrior like him and not a bureaucrat, which is why he asked him what was the matter directly. After this attack, Munster answered our main character that a black wave crossed the Ural Mountains. Indescribable creatures were seen on the northern border of the Black Forest, and with them came an unknown illness. But according to their calculations, which they made hastily, this will be the earliest arrival of the wave in recent years, but no less cruel and terrifying as all previous similar black waves. The master continued saying that according to the scouts' reports, the average level of monsters in the group had increased significantly. The appearance of gold-level monsters was possible. The guy was quite calm. Our main character continued asking his friend what was wrong with this, because this is an ordinary black wave that has appeared in the Black Forest, not for the first time. Its next appearance was a matter of time. Munster continued turning to Joshua that just because they had dealt with this threat before, it did not become any less dangerous. If he rose to the gold level, it does not mean that he achieved the strength of his father. Our main character's old friend continued telling him that he shouldn't take everything so lightly, especially since the plague he spoke about complicates everything, because this is not a simple flu epidemic. Taking out another paper, the master continued saying that he would like to know more. But the reports he read said that the source of this infection seemed to be moving quickly. He took out a map. Taking out a map to show where the plague epidemic came from, the master continued saying that the first signs of the wave were at the eastern foot of the mountains, and later it moved to the central and southern Black Forest region. Continuing to show points on the map to our main character, this guy continued saying that after that, the disease suddenly arose in the very northeast, and now it has already reached their borders. After the battle with the monsters brought by this black wave, some warriors got tired too quickly, and in some isolated cases they even lost consciousness during the battle. The master continued saying that the weakest of them experienced excruciating pain and often died, but those who had a higher level tolerated the disease much more easily but were subject to mutation. While the rather serious conversation between these two continued, it was interrupted because after a couple of moments, a maid and the divine weapon of our main character came from the kitchen and brought a treat. But despite the fact that this maid had already been informed that this eccentric was an old friend of our main character, she continued to treat him as an ordinary eccentric. This eccentric noticed this. A couple of moments after this, Joshua asked his maid to once again pour tea for him and his interlocutor, an old comrade. He asked the master not to pay attention to Yin and continue. After Yin proceeded to pour tea for our main character, and the old comrade opposite him, he tried to continue his serious conversation about the Black Wave and the plague epidemic. He continued saying that the stronger fighters had changed due to mutations, their bodies took on a blue tint, their eyes became bloodshot, and a greenish haze emanated from their mouths and nostrils. Their strength in turn increased significantly. In addition to this, they went crazy and fell into a murderous rage. At this stage, a person loses all control over the body. Joshua said that this is a disease that can turn strong warriors into enemies of their own kind. The master replied that the guy noticed exactly, and since after an attack by an infected person on a healthy person, the latter gets sick, the Royal Society decided to declare an epidemic. Right now, the militia, along with troops sent from all over the world, is trying to overcome this infection and stop the tide. And due to the unexpected appearance of the disease, losses on the outskirts of colossal proportions, fortunately, not a single fortress has been damaged so far. It is for this reason that His Majesty sent him to him with a message, so that our main character would not forget about the threat of the Black Wave, and he was also asked to convey a gift from the chief deputy commanders of the Black Crows. In addition, he added that the guy would appreciate it. Our main character immediately became interested. Next, this man took out an old amulet. He told our main character that his armor was badly damaged in the battle in Thomas Canyon. One might say they were destroyed, but there was no point in reforging it because there was little time. Therefore, this man suggested that Joshua accept this enchanted armor. It is not as good as the skillfully forged by the rune priests. However, it is still one of the best sets of armor that he has seen. Our main character didn't even think about refusing this worthy fit, which is why he reached for this thing and began to cast an icy wind magic spell. The enchanted armor began to glow. After Joshua lightly touched this enchanted armor, it became covered in red light and began to abruptly transfer to our main character. They transferred to him just like an Iron Man suit. After a couple of moments, this rather quick process ended, and our main character was already in his brand new enchanted armor that looked like real gigachads in the world of armor. The master asked Joshua how they were for him. They used the same magical enchantments that were cast on his last sword, and added to all this the strengthening of the urn. The armor also underwent magical hardening and increases the characteristics of the owner.